Okay, thanks a lot, Morgan, and thanks, Michael, for putting on a great show. This is great to see so many faces. When I was 19 years old, I was an engineering student, and I got a job in Hinton, Alberta, in a pulp mill. And I was from Montreal, but I was going to Queen's University, sort of big city Montreal upbringing, and Queens, which is, small town Ontario, but fairly cosmopolitan place. And I had this image in my mind. At the time, there was a show, I don't know if you remember Northern Exposure, that show. So I had this image in my mind, of this little town with philosophical radio DJs and quirky and helpful and wise shop owners, and of course a beautiful bush pilot who would, be romanced by me. And so it turns out Hinton is a little town, and it's about an hour away from Jasper National Park, right in the foothills of the Rockies. So there's this beautiful view of the mountains. But the town itself, it's got two main industries. One is a pulp mill, and the other is a coal mine. And so basically it was a town that was smelled like rotten eggs all the time and was filled with sort of big burly guys in pickup trucks, and it really wasn't exactly what I was imagining. But I still had high hopes when I got there. I thought, this is really, I'm a young engineer and I'm going to be doing really exciting, interesting work. I'm not sure what I was thinking, really, what the romance of working in a pulp mill as an engineering student, but I had this idea that somehow it would be challenging and fun and great. And I got there, and a week after I arrived in Hinton, Alberta, and I arrived for work one morning, and there was a little plume of smoke coming up from where the engineering offices was, and I thought, oh, that's not a very good thing. And there were all these fire hydrants around, or fire trucks around. So it turned out the engineering office had burned down, and all the I don't know if you've ever seen engineering drawings, but they're in these huge cabinets, and all the huge, big blueprint things had been charred. They were protected because they were in supposedly fireproof cabinets, but they got charred. And I'm getting somewhere with this story, but so Weldwood Pulp and Paper sent all these things to some company somewhere, and they sent back reproductions of them, tens of thousands in these blocks of thousands. And it was my job for the entire summer, 3.5 months, I was informed by my boss, to take these drawings and organize them, because they were all mixed up, put them in order, and file them. And for my summer, I had a little, one of those, what do you call them, trailers was my home. So a trailer that sort of smelled of smoke and burning stuff, and I had to spend the whole summer filing these files. And I was pretty sure, I think, actually I'm getting a bit teared up now as I think about the feeling that I had as this 19-year-old kid who had these high hopes for what Hinton, Alberta was going to bring to me, and here I was going to be filing drawings all summer. So I was absolutely devastated, and I thought, I'm going to go completely insane, because I just can't handle doing something as dull and boring as this for 3.5 months. There was one thing that saved my life, I think, saved my sanity, and the reason that I'm standing here today is the Hinton Public Library, and they had a nice collection of books, which I read over the summer, but they also, thank God, had a collection of audiobooks on cassettes. And I had one of those, those yellow plastic Sony sports Walkmans from the old days. Had one of those, and I just listened to their whole collection over the course of the summer. So I spent and what was beautiful was that I could do unlimited overtime. So I was making tons of money, and if I could find a way to keep my sanity for extra hours while I was filing this stuff, I would survive and make lots of money. So I listened to audiobooks all day long. I listened to Poe and Twain and Jane Austen and Ken Follett and Douglas Adams and all this other stuff. I got to the point I listened to Daniel Steele. I listened to whatever there was, or that was sort of at the end of the summer was a bit tougher than the beginning, actually. But what was amazing was, here I was doing this work, right? And I had to file these drawings. I had to do this really boring, horrendous job, and yet I could be listening at the same time. Now, it wasn't the same experience as reading, but I found over the course of the summer I would have, it would come to lunch break or time to stop or whatever, and I would be sitting there for 15 extra minutes waiting for the chapter to end. So I'd gotten totally engaged in books in a way that was enabled by these audiobooks, and in a space of time that normally I wouldn't be able to read in. So that's my introduction story. I'm supposed to talk about building online community and LibriVox, and making books accessible, I think. But as Morgan said, I decided instead to talk about time, love, and books. But I think it matches anyway. So I'm going to give you a bit of background on LibriVox, which is another story of my life. When I was a kid, I had a friend who had a house, his family had a house out in Matisse, which is out in the Gas Bay. It's about 6.5-hour drive. And I used to get really car sick on the way out there. And because I would go out there a couple of times with his family. But they had audiobooks on the way, and 6.5 hours when you're 10 years old seems like 100 years. But they would play these audiobooks, and somehow, again, it was another time when there was no way I could be reading or doing anything. I otherwise been sitting there going crazy, and yet they played these audiobooks, and it made those journeys go by quickly. And so fast forward into later in my life, and this friend got married, and he was going to get married in Matisse. And it was around the time I discovered podcasting and free culture, and I knew about Project Gutenberg and Wikipedia and all this great stuff that was online. I thought, gee, I bet there's a group of people around the world who are making audio versions of public domain books, so books that are out of copyright, because there's podcasting, there's all sorts of stuff. So I went around, I thought, oh yeah, audiobooks, I'll download some and then I'll go to Matisse. So I looked around, and actually there wasn't. There were a few projects, they were doing short fiction and stuff, and I couldn't find any long fiction, which is what I wanted, but I did find this one woman w'd done 8 chapters, I think, of Lady Chatterley. I had never read, but after my experience with Danielle Steele, I thought, well, yeah, Lady Chatterley's Lover, that sounds good. So I downloaded that, put it on CDs, and off we went to this wedding, and we got to Matisse, and then halfway back, and then it was over, and I was thinking, geez, I'd kind of like to find out what happens here, but the woman had only gotten to chapter 8 or something like that, and so I had to wait. And as I was driving, I thought, well, I was thinking about open source and Wikipedia and all this stuff, so I said, well, how about setting up a project that's kind of an open source project and just let people all over the world say, okay, well, I'll do one chapter, I'll do another chapter, and then we collect a book, and then when we're finished, we'll put it up, and we'll just go on and see how that goes. So I got home, and I set up on a free blogging service. I set up a website. I sent out some emails. I chose a book, Joseph Conrad's Secret Agent, and I think that day we had 13 people say, yeah, I'll record a chapter. And so that's how it started, and later we had 8 books, and I thought, wow, that's amazing. We have a couple hundred people involved in this, and we've produced 8 books in 3 months, and this is great. So things went on, and they just took off. So now we have thousands of volunteers around the world. We put out 60 to 100 audiobooks per month. Our record was 115 we put out one month. We've got a catalog of 2,100 works in 29 different languages. Some recent books were P.G. Wodehouse book. We put out Sinclair Lewis's Babbitt. We've got Kant, and we've got Jane Austen and Lucy Maud Montgomery. We've got Sun Tzu, Darwin's Origin of the Species. We have, of course, Einstein's Theory of Relativity. I'm sure all of you have died to really want to listen to that in audio, but we've got it if you want it. We have Gibbon's Decline and Fall, of course, of the Roman Empire. We have an enormous collection of free audiobooks in the public domain. And the objective of the project from the beginning was to record every single public domain text into audio and give it away on the internet for free. So as of now, we have about 40,000 visits a day to our site. Our top 10 downloads in a week get downloaded about 50,000 times. The most popular gets downloaded in the millions over the course of its, well, that's not true. The most popular one, 750,000, I think, but the top 10 is in the millions. And those stats are horrendous, by the way. Where we host our files, they just keep terrible stats. So that's kind of the scope of the project. And what's really important about this was all done entirely by volunteers, and our budget for this project from the beginning has been $0, so not a dollar has been spent. That's, again, we have some platform infrastructure that is used, but marketing budget $0, staff $0, administration $0, all done by volunteers. So the question, I guess, a little bit in the context of what the BookNet folks want me to talk about is how did we build this community? And I took the train up, and I have this bad habit. I speak about LibriVox fairly often, and it seems like every time I take the train, I end up coming up with really wonky, obscure ideas of what I want to talk about. So I'm going to drift off a little bit, but then at the end I'm going to try to bring it back to some practicalities. So here's an idea that the book business, and this goes for any media business in general, that the most important thing that you do, really, is time acquisition. That's really, time is the commodity that you guys really trade in. So you have writers over here and readers over here, and your job is to find a way to get readers to give time to your writers. And if you don't succeed in doing that as a business, whether you're a bookseller or a publisher or whatever it is, or a writer, you're going to fail somehow at some point. If you can't convince readers to give you their time, you're not going to succeed as a business. So kind of following from this, my proposal is that the publisher's job and the book business's job is to find a way to acquire more readers' time on behalf of your writers. And there's a big problem, and this is really the fundamental problem of digital. It's not DRM or ebooks or whatever. The fundamental problem is that time is really becoming the scarcest commodity out there. In the old days, the book business in general, you had 7 or 8 things you were competing against. You know, there was radio and television and maybe playing hockey and Scrabble and drinking beer and sex and maybe a few other things, but that was it, right? If you look at the world today, you've got all that still there competing for your readers' time, but you also have YouTube, Lolcats, Boing Boing, World of Warcraft, Guitar Hero, Facebook, IM, and countless other distractions. And I can speak from experience of being a consumer of lots of those things instead of books. So the situation we live in right now is that information, entertainment, content is abundant, it's plentiful, it's everywhere. You can't move anywhere in the digital space without having content raining down on you. And that's only going to become more so as the world goes on. Just think of Wikipedia, something that didn't exist 10 years ago, which has, I don't know how many millions of pages. Or LibriVox, for that matter. You know, in some sense, maybe we compete against some of your audio stuff. There's 2,100 books people can choose from for free. This stuff is going to continue on. This is the real challenge that you face. So the challenge, again, in the book business, I think, is to find more ways to help readers spend more time with books, with writers. And that's why I told the story about my experience in Hinton, Alberta at the beginning of this, because there was a time, my slice of time, that I wouldn't be able to be reading a regular book, and yet I could listen to audio. So audio is one area where your content can go to people in times when they wouldn't be able to read books otherwise. Another one is ebooks. So just 3 quick stories. One, I have a insomniac wife, so if I wake her up at night, I'm in big trouble, and occasionally I get insomnia myself. The other night, 4:30 in the morning, reached over, picked up my iPod, and started reading War and Peace in the dark without turning on a light or anything on my iPod Touch. 2, I was at a bar waiting for someone to come. It was really... And I was sitting in a bar thinking, I'm really bored here, and I just pulled out my iPod, sat it on the bar, and started reading, again, War and Peace in the bar. It was great. Number 3, in a squashed bus, and there's no way to pull out a paperback, but I could pull out my little iPod and read my book there. So those are 3 bits of my time that I'm able to give to that writer that weren't available to the publishing industry 5 years ago. So I think that the publishing industry has to find and continue to find more ways to help readers spend more time with their writers and their books. And that's a really important point. So when I hear about DRM and all the kinds of ways that publishers say, no, we have to block, we have to do things to block reader access to our stuff, I really think you're going on a dangerous route because there's just so many other options. But anyway, talk about DRM. We'll save that for Neelan, and I can talk about that later. Okay, this is kind of a scary scenario where you see all this stuff happening and all this competition for time that's growing in the world. And I think there's a saving grace, and that's the second thing in my list here, which is love. It's that the passion that people have for books is intense, and I think it pervades our culture. I don't think it's going anywhere. If you just think about yourselves in this room, how much you love books. You know, you've chosen as your careers to be involved in books. You have a deep passion for them, and you're not alone. There are millions of other people out there in the world who are just like you, who love books. So in a way, in the book business, your job is easy, right? It's just to find ways to help more people who love the stuff you're doing find the stuff that you're doing. So just another quick story about love of books and how amazing some people are about books. Sibella Denton is one of the LibriVox volunteers. She has recorded 2,163 chapters for LibriVox. So that's a total of 5% of our entire catalog, just under 5%, which is equal to 21 continuous days of audio literature, or 505 hours that she's done. And I'm pretty careless. I don't really record much anymore, but in the early days, I would do about 3 to 1, so 20 minutes of recording would take about an hour of work to get done. She's probably a lot more rigorous than I was. So that's probably 1,500 hours that Sibella Denton has dedicated to reading books, recording them, and giving them away for free on the internet. And so the question kind of becomes, what does this mean? You know, here is this deep love of books. There's this changing land. What can we as a publishing business in general and a book business in general do to harness that deep love that people have for books? So this is nominally a tech conference, I think, so I'm going to do another esoteric postulation here, which is the fundamental difference, or a fundamental difference, between love in the pre-internet world and love in the post-internet world. So here's an idea that one of the things that's most pleasurable in the world is loving things, right? It feels great, everyone loves to do it. But there's something that's almost as pleasurable, or maybe even more pleasurable, and that's telling people about the things that you love. We love to do this. We tell our parents about books that we read that moved us, and there's nothing better than getting together in a group and talking about writers you love or writers you hate. We love to do this. We love to share the things we love. And if I knew about, I love Heather O'Neill's Lullabies for Little Criminals. That I've just told 250 people about my love, and that's quite an interesting thing, and all of you know a bit of information, but it's gone. As soon as you guys leave here, that information stays with you, but there's no trace of it. And this is really the fundamental difference of the internet, what it brings. It's that when we make expressions of love on the internet, or in the web in general, we generally do it in text, and we leave a trace. We leave a trace. You say, I love Heather O'Neill, and that's there in text. And even more important than that bit of text is that the underlying architecture of the internet is based on links. So if I can express my love and use a link to point to something in particular, that is really what is the basis of how the internet works right now. So if I have a blog post about something I love, or a Twitter about something that I forum post or whatever, that leaves these little markers down under the fundamental structure of the internet. And this is really how Google works. Google is kind of like an archaeologist of the little marks of love that happen in the internet. And they sort of sift through the history of love that's been left there, and then rank things in terms of importance based on that. So the more traces of love that are left on the web, the more Google sees that something's important, and the easier it becomes to find, and that's really the crucial point. So when time is scarce, and information and entertainment sources are abundant, the most important thing for publishers to do is to make sure that people who love and care about the stuff that they're doing can find them and leave their own marks of love as well. And so to make that happen, you have to not only be easy to find, but also encourage people to leave those little bits of love around the web, so that Google, the great archaeologist, can help other people find the things that you're publishing. So that's my esoteric kind of bit. I'm going to come down and now be really practical. And I've been ranting recently about publishers who are just seem to be doing things wrong, in my opinion, and some of this is maybe basic, but I would recommend to all of you who say, what should a publisher be doing, go look at what Harlequin's doing. Those guys are, I had dinner with them last night, and with a number of other people, and they're just everything that I would expect and hope a publisher to be doing, they're doing it. There's one, I'm going to add just a quick caveat, is that I think mobile changes all these rules that I've talked about a little bit. So you guys, if you haven't quite got sorted out the internet yet, there's mobile yet to sort out, and that's going to change things a bit. But here are just a few suggestions to people, and then I guess I'll open up for questions if anyone wants. So number one is kind of a principle is find the writers you love and try to find as many ways as you can to let your readers connect with your writers. So if you look at LibriVox, for instance, we found public domain classics, and we just found an interesting way for people to connect with those books and to read them, and it left this there's this huge amount of interest that happened around the web because of that. And I pitched this idea to Harlequin last night. It just occurred to me, and so I'll bring it out to you. Why not let people use your content a little bit more, do different things? And I guess this is more for fiction, but it probably applies to nonfiction as well. I mean, what if all those books that ever invest in audio, why don't you let fans of the books make audio versions of those? Just an idea. So find ways to connect your readers, as many ways as you can, with your writers and the stuff you're writing. Have a website. I know it seems weird to say that there, but sometimes I go to websites and I just think, what is going on? I'm searching for stuff on the web. I find your website. Have the information about the books. Have the information about the authors. It's very simple, but it's amazing that some don't. Have a page for every book. That page should have as much information as you can find on the web. Point to it. So Wikipedia articles about the author, about the book, any blog posts, reviews, anything, point out to it. If you can stick a little widget that uses Google RSS alerts, so anytime any blog mentions your books, it pops up automatically on your site. Find out who's talking about your books in Delicious and Twitter and Technorati. Find out and link out to it, because when you link out from your site, that shows your love for the people who are appreciating the stuff that you're doing. And they'll return the favor. So then think about yourselves as lovers of books, and when you really love a book, what do you do? And I think there's maybe a bit of a generational problem, because when I love something or interested in something, or I need to find information about something, I just go to the internet and I look for it. And I read a couple of years ago, I read a book that was really moving to me, and I just went, I bought the guy's biography. I went and found every interview I could find. I found YouTube videos, whatever I could find about the guy, movies I rented and stuff like that. I want that information. I think that's the case for any lover of books. So if you as publishers can provide that, you're allowing the love to flow back in, because people will link to it. Ask your readers what they want. I was at Tools of Change in New York, and I was quite shocked that in all the discussions that were had, there was very little discussion of what does the reader want. So ask, again, and this is why I think that Harlequin's really interesting, is because they've gone out and they really have their readers implicated in what they're doing. So find out more ways to let people do more things with your book, and do everything in your power to encourage people on the web to talk about your books and to write about them and to Twitter about them or whatever, because that leaves down those traces of love that are going to help you be visible on the web. So just in summary, at LibriVox we created this huge community doing, I think, a quite wonderful thing. We're making an open, free collection of audiobooks for anyone to listen to. And we did it really just by helping people do something they love to do with books. And it was sort of surprising to me how much people love to do it, and the obscure books. Romance of Rubber by the American Indian Trade Company or something is one of our audiobooks. But people put in the time. They care about these things. Don't underestimate the passion of book lovers, and do everything in your power to help them spend more time with your books. And that's it. So thank you. And I guess if there are questions, I will take them. So, question back there.
Hi. What formats do you offer your audiobooks in, and how do you offset the costs of, servers?
Right. So the question was, what formats do we offer the books in, and how do we offset the costs? So formats, we offer MP3 at 64 kilobytes per second, MP3 at 128 kilobytes per second, kilobits, sorry, and Ogg Vorbis, and I forget the kilobits there. And we offset our costs. There's a great project in the US called the Internet Archive. They host all sorts of things, but their idea is to be a digital library of free content of one kind or another, and we host all our audio with them. So we don't have any cost for serving the audio, and then we have a small cost that was borne by volunteers and then Project Gutenberg for our front end server. Any other questions? Yeah.
What do you do to earn a living?
What do I do to earn a living? So I have a software company called BookOven, which you can go visit the thing there. But I'll take out the implication of what your question is, which is, so have you guys heard of Clay Shirky, who's written an interesting book that you should probably read called Here Comes Everybody? So someone in the TV industry apparently was interviewing him or something like this, and they rolled their eyes and said, Wiki, where do they find the time? And his answer was, no one in the television industry has the right to ask anyone where they find the time to do anything. And what his point was is that TV is basically this massive suck of useful brain time that we could be doing interesting things with. And it's totally wasted and totally passive. And so if you're editing Wikipedia or doing audiobooks or whatever, you're doing something you enjoy that's actually useful and productive. So the answer, and the other snarky answer I give is, do you ever throw dinner parties? And of course, yes. And do you charge for them? No. And so what do you do for a living then? That's kind of crazy. So the answer is, the answer is that people do this because they enjoy it. And I spend I don't know, an hour a day kind of playing around on LibriVox. But there's just a huge network of people who spend a lot of time on it because. Yes. Yep. Right. So I'm from Montreal. I started the project in Montreal, but it became quickly apparent that it was going to be a legal nightmare unless we could figure out a way to sort that out. So everything is hosted in the U.S., and actually the Internet Archive owns our domain name. So to the extent that we have a legal existence, it's kind of the Internet Archive. So we use U.S. copyright laws exclusively. We have little notices saying if you're not from the U.S., then you should check to see if this book is under copyright in your country. And we rely on the legal work that's done by Project Gutenberg, which does fairly extensive legal checking for every book that they put up. And that's a great project that you should all support as well. Other question? I'm getting the nod. So, thank you.